Hi, everyone. I'm delighted to be here. My name is Rodolfo Neirotti. I am one of two partners of 2N Trade, and the other is Pablo Neirotti, who is, yes, my brother. You can see our contact information at the bottom of each slide. We are a importer in the United States, relatively new, and hence the title of the presentation today. I wanted to quickly thank the organizers of WSBF. It's logistically a big mountain to climb to execute something like this, and I'm very impressed. I have to say, particularly when it's all digital, and also very grateful to be invited to speak to you and to be among such distinguished guests. If you have questions, I will happily answer them at the end of my remarks, and I will also be available to be contacted in the at our stand, where you have my information as well as my brother's contact information. So how wineries can better serve innovative importers, their clients, and the consumers. Lessons from the first year. The first year being our first year in operation. Really, during the pandemic, it became clear to us, even though the idea preceded it, that if you don't take advantage of such a disruption, to either learn a new language, learn a new skill, acquire new education, or start a new venture, you're wasting precious time. So we decided to start a new venture. Let me move on to the next slide here. Okay, so just so you understand a bit of background, I'll put this into context for you as to why we said to ourselves, we need to become an importer into the United States and do things differently, do things right, do things disruptively and innovatively, be entrepreneurial, and seize the opportunity. For those of you who don't know, the landscape in the US has been evolving for quite some time. Deregulation, more licenses, it has meant greater access to wine and therefore a more competitive landscape. This has put downward pressure on prices, and particularly for brands that have transparency. Professional national retailers, they've successfully been navigating this and reclaiming gross profit for some time now. But the undifferentiated players in the middle, I think they're unlikely to change much or quickly, and they will continue to compete on price until the end. However, savvy retailers, if they have an ability to sell volume and the distributors who serve them, they do see the gross profit opportunity in alternate labels and or exclusive labels. And this is particularly true for wines that retail at $25 or less, where I would suggest that the consumer seeks a certain style and or varietal, less so concerned about origin of the wine. So what is an innovative importer? It has distinguishing features, and these I would posit are the central ones, the more important ones. One, we're looking for wines that dramatically over-deliver at the price point. That's the cornerstone upon which it's built, the foundation. If you don't find these wines, it's going to be very difficult to do the remainder of what you're looking to accomplish. And I should go back and say, this whole presentation, I hope, will serve wineries as a manual of how to work with importers like us and others who will follow. Then it's important to be present, or as present as possible, whatever the equivalent of that is, which we've learned over the past year does not necessarily have to be physical, in both the originating country where the product comes from and or multiple countries, and the destination markets, which is true for us as well. I'm in the United States, my brother is in Argentina. An innovative importer understands basic tenet of logistics, and that is that the best physical movement of any goods is the one that never happens. There are no efficiencies to be gained from moving something that you could have not moved, or where you could have moved it fewer times, because obviously costs are added at every opportunity you do move the goods. An innovative importer also intimately knows and understands what key accounts retailers and distributors are, and what they're looking for in terms of quality, varietal, region, and landed cost to them. So this requires actually knowing the market. And in my case, that comes from 15 plus years of experience building a chain retail, a successful chain retail business here in Massachusetts. We first obtain commitments, and then we place orders from wineries. So it's the other way around from what you conventionally would expect, where an importer goes to find the goods and then attempts to sell them. We turn that around. We've already sold them by the time we go get them. And an innovative importer also needs a culture of easy and simple towards clients to reduce friction. It's my experience that a lot of the time, unfortunately, the default answer and the culture in our industry is not one of yes, we can, or yes, we'll figure it out, yes, we'll find a way, but no. And then you have to sort of convince the party to get to yes. So we suggest departing from yes. It's a much more productive way to build a relationship, and it's also far more professional. So that's what I would consider as an innovative importer and its distinguishing features. No questions so far? Good. Okay. There are some other considerations that I think are important to take into account. An innovative importer should make sure that it's able to walk before running, eschewing the practice of over-promising and under-delivering. And again, I think that that's often happened. And we said, it can't be that way. It actually has to be the complete opposite. We have to over-deliver beyond what we've promised. And that takes really clear communications between the winery and the importer. I see there's a question. Do you obtain commitments from restaurants, or can you only sell to distributors? We are only an importer, and we're only an importer intentionally. So we're not an importer distributor. And there are reasons for that. I can get into them if time allows, and I think it will. So we obtain commitments from key account retailers and could obtain commitments from key account restaurants, or probably more likely restaurant chains, as well as from the distributor. And this is something that if you're working with multiple alternate labels for a given wine, you're able to do. There's no conflict, not only an original conflict with the winery or an existing brand, but you could give a restaurant group a label, a retail group a label, and the distributor, for its own purposes, a label. We've begun with retailers, frankly. It's what I know best, and it's also where, particularly this past year and perhaps for some time to come, the volume is. But of course, restaurants are a valid target. But indeed, we have to sell into a distributor, and I can speak more to that later. For the time being, it's been very clear to us that we add the most value as an importer, and the distributor adds their value as an experienced logistics provider, as well as marketing agent in the market. So, and maybe to take a step back, what that question obviously brings up is that it's important to note for this to work, there have to be quantity commitments. So, and I'll get into that a little later, but in essence, if you're going to have efficiency, you're not going to be importing small amounts. You're not going to be grabbing pallet here, pallet there, et cetera, consolidating into a 20-foot container, which costs the same to ship as a 40-foot container. So if you're moving significant quantities into a 40-foot container with fewest possible consolidations, you're looking for buyers that can move a certain volume if you're going to repeat this at a certain pace. Therefore, any given one restaurant is unlikely, because the turnover for any product they would be able to buy in volume would likely be a glass pour, of which there are only so many. Thank you for that question. So I spoke to the clear communication between the winery and the importer as to what are the ambitions of the importer and the markets that they want to get into. That should be clear from the beginning. Quality and quantity, particularly quantity continuity, are all important, and there has to be an upfront discussion about that right at the beginning. You cannot have quality variation. You also cannot have you cannot have any disruptions to the flow of quantity. Otherwise, you can claim to be better, different, innovative, whatever you like, but you'll break one of the cardinal rules, which is, oh, I don't have any more of that. And now you've lost a spot that took energy and effort on everybody's part to get. Vintage turnover matters, and that's something that is directly tied to quality, right? Wine is an agricultural product, as we all know, and there are quality variations from vintage to vintage. And if they're significant enough, there's an opportunity to say, I can't really take a position on this, or a significant position on this, or something has to change because this isn't like it was previously. And that you can only do if you think about vintage, if you taste every vintage, if you communicate openly about vintage with the winery, that it's clear that this is important, that it's clear that you will evaluate and that you will judge each wine in its vintage on its own merits. Not that you will roll over without any thought or evaluation. I think that would be a mistake. Let me hit present again. I don't know why that. Okay, there we go. I apologize for that. So back where we were. And lastly, I would say administrative and production problems or delays at the winery level, they jeopardize the entire operation all the way down to the consumer. So an issue at the winery, you risk the very end consumer because of, again, delays, issues in continuity, issues in, you name it, there's so many. But the point is, look, even if there's no good save in that scenario, right? The consumer ultimately only cares about what they've paid for. So there is no winning, there is no winner. There's only a loser in a scenario like this, because everyone looks bad. The retailer looks bad, and even if the importer and the distributor in the middle aren't the ones facing, their loss of business will directly impact them, and the winery will have a damage to its reputation. So I think there needs to be a real thought about administrative and production issues and an ability to openly discuss those, to get ahead of them, and to try to avoid them as much as possible. This may seem obvious, but it has been striking to us how easy it is to run into some of these things. And they're solvable. You can solve for them. They are avoidable. Now, some challenges. Innovative importers, they're not looking to do business as usual. And the profile, it may vary from convention. So as a winery, I think the winery needs to keep an open mind about who is approaching them. If you have a lot of barriers up, if it isn't easy to figure out who to reach out to, if you only accept warm introductions, you know as a winery how easy it is or how difficult you've made it to reach your export person. Well, you should turn that upside down and say, not everybody that approaches us is going to look the same or is going to look like the people we already work with. So let's keep an open mind about who we're going to work with, because you're likely potentially turning away potential business. I think there should be reasonable compromises on terms. This is key, particularly on subsequent orders. Sticking to guns here is, I don't think, a productive approach. Avoiding inventory sitting in an importer's warehouse, which is ideally an innovative importer wouldn't need to have one, at least not for as long as possible. And that means that you need real supply chain management, and that, again, communications are key. Both of these things, in order to avoid sitting inventory, which just add costs, and then you're no different than existing entities. And the other challenge is to ensure early and often that gross profit opportunities, they require enduring partnerships that are governed by defined terms regarding confidentiality, pricing. This needs to be very clear up front and over communicated, and it needs to go back to this over and over and over. The opportunities, obviously far more attractive than the challenges in our opinion. A winery can sell much more wine. Distributors and retailers can attain greater profits, greater gross profits, without the worry of transparency. This is by reaching new customers, and often by just reclaiming shelf space that was previously lost. If savvy retailers, they will eventually escort out brands that they can no longer compete on. So why not return under a different paradigm and get that back? I don't believe this conflicts with existing winery arrangements, not if it's done well and professionally and according to well-defined parameters that are agreed upon and adhered to. And lastly, I think the consumer, they get to discover new products, and products that, again, as I said from the very beginning, over-deliver, and that then they will wish to purchase again. And that's the key part. And there's something that sets apart the American consumer, which is a fundamental curiosity. And now that, as we at least here, reach toward the end of a pandemic, and there isn't a rushed consumer trying to get in and out of a supermarket, grabbing the most sort of memorable, clever brand they can think of, in which it's been around, it's perfectly transparent, and millions of dollars of branding and marketing have been spent on. But we're past that. So people can return to places where they can browse and they can get help in navigating a selection. So that is what I have for everyone today. I hope this serves as a manual to wineries as to what an innovative, forward-looking import looks like, and how to better serve them, their distributors, and ultimately the consumer. I think there may be just a few moments left, and if there are any questions, I'm happy to field those. If there aren't, I am grateful for your time and for the opportunity today to speak to you. And again, to the organizers for executing this, as well as my fellow panelists and presenters. It's a privilege to be here today. Thank you.